Everyone for joining us for our next talk with Natalia Shelburne, developing emotionally intelligent teams in tech. So I'm thrilled to introduce Natalia today. Natalia is a New York-based designer, developer, author, educator, speaker, artist, and doer of good deeds. She is currently a senior manager of infrastructure at GitHub. She was previously a senior software engineer at the New York Times and has been an occasional instructor at Harvard Extension School. Natalia holds bachelor's degrees in studio art and psychology and a master's degree in creativity and talent development. Crossing disciplines and building bridges between design and engineering is at the foundation of much of her work. And she has been an active member of Women Who Code since 2015. We are so excited to have you, Natalia. I'm adding you to the screen now. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Well, with an intro like that, I guess the first piece of advice before I start is write your own bio early and often. And it's actually 2014. I had to look up the exact date I joined Women Who Code, and it was in 2014. Time really flies. So before I begin this talk, I added this slide yesterday. What a time to be giving a talk about emotional intelligence when the news and social media is what it is. Um, I lived in Texas for a really long time. I have taught kids in the classroom, and I am just sitting here thinking, like, how can I give a talk on leading in challenging times when I am having challenging times myself right now? It feels so overwhelmingly dark. Um, when I don't want to show up, how do I ask others to show up? Um, and so yesterday, I put my computer away. I brushed my daughter's hair. I took her to the playground for an extra long day. And I just thought through what I wanted to say just a little bit more. And the thing that kept coming back to me was just, if not me, then who? And that has been a mantra all of 2020. Then, if not me, then who? Who's going to be able to do it? What? This is so heavy, but this is the work. Um, this is an important message for me to share, so I would love to share it with a community that's meant a lot to me over the past what is it, 8 or 9 years. Um, so I'm very excited to be here with you today. I'm very glad to be just in this community of friends, and thank you for being here, for being present when everything feels so heavy. And I just want to start with this. This is something I say to my teams all the time. Let's show up for each other. We can't control what's happening in the world. We can rarely control what's going on around us at all. But what we can do is show up for each other. So thank you for showing up. And I'm here as well, and I'm very excited to talk about developing emotionally intelligent teams in tech. Hello. Um, my name's Natalia, and like my bio said, I thrive on being multidisciplinary. I have a master's degree in talent development and creativity, degree in psychology, studio art. I'm a curious person, and I love learning new things. Um, and I am very exhausted by things like this in tech. This is one of the first things I encountered that made me really pause. Like, passion. I see a lot of things asking for passion, a lot of conversations about passion, a lot of tech companies asking passionate people to join. But then I see a whole lot of places just not taking care of them, and kind of like saying, like, well, they're getting burned out. We don't know what's going on here. So I want to talk about this. What is this passion? Why are we burning up this non-renewable resource? Um, I I almost want to do like a lazy climate change metaphor as I talk about this, but I'm going to shy away from it. But just think about the ways that we've been enticed into tech to say we need to feel a certain way about tech. Um, but who's coming in with a full cup, right? I'm going to go with the cup metaphor instead here. You can't pour from an empty cup. And what this talk is not at all is about how to squeeze more out of people through some emotional intelligence life hacks. Like, that is not what I'm doing. If that's what you think this is, like, close this tab and don't manage people. This is a a conversation about um, emotional intelligence, about energy, and this BYOB, like, bring your own passion. We won't let you keep a sustainable pace of everything of tech that has emerged is just not cutting it anymore, especially not after the last 2 years of pandemic, ongoing everything. People are showing up burned out. They're showing up unable to access their passion. And the great resignation is absolutely no surprise to me. And so, because this short talk is so short, um, I'm just going to keep going with metaphors because I want to share my mental model of how I think about these things and the specific actionable things you can do to grow the emotional intelligence of your teams, to encourage it, to reward it, to incentivize it. It's going to be a talk about crabs, black holes, cows, flow, and all sorts of things. So, buckle in. But the ultimate message is we can do a lot better than what we're doing right now. Um, because if we can't, like, what are we doing? Um, when I switched into tech, the bar for um, just any awareness of emotional intelligence seemed so profoundly low that it was almost like a point of pride. The reason it took me kind of like a scenic tour, roundabout way to get into engineering was because I was told my whole life, like, yes, you love computers, but you're good with people, so don't go into computers. And that just never made any sense to me because emotion is information. It's a powerful signal that should never be discounted. It doesn't sit at odds with logic. Um, and at the same time, as I really just learned about the attitudes in tech, it was just like, why are we generalizing things? Like, why are these terms flying around in tech that I learned as part of my psychology degree, but they're so simplified and misunderstood? Like right brain, left brain, creative versus logical, emotional versus rational, then it's like design versus engineering, boys versus girls. Like it's like all of design and engineering took these patterns that we love to just like find patterns, assign meaning, and we went a little wild with it because if left unexamined, those kinds of kind of pattern matching generalizations get us into a lot of trouble and hold us back. And I know I can't do a show of hands, so maybe you just tweet or do something. I don't know, like raise your own hand in your own Zoom room, wherever you are. Uh, Raise your own hand if you have ever heard that girls mature faster than boys. Women are just more naturally intelligent, and boys just don't really seem to get it. And emotion is opposed to reason, and all of these generalizations just taken for granted as you were doing something else. Um, and what if those statements and those assumptions were just because of the expectations from some parts of the population to be emotionally intelligent? The bar is higher for some people, and the bar is much lower for other people. And I love thinking about the consequences of this kind of thing. What are the consequences of labeling a whole group of people as emotionally unintelligent and being like, that's all right? Or labeling a whole other group saying, you are emotionally intelligent. We expect that of you. So let's see it. Um, and I'd love to ask you, what if we didn't do that? So like I said, I have a master's in talent development and creativity, which is as cool as it sounds. It's just like I spent my graduate study learning how people learn, how they develop creative talent in any discipline. Art doesn't have dibs on it. And I used to teach design for 6 years. And I think about potential a whole lot. It's my favorite thing to just see potential, develop potential, all that. I will always be an educator at heart. And I want to tell you about a study by Robert Rosenthal. And so there was this assessment developed that could spot student potential, even before teachers could. And so the researchers gave this to teachers, put them in classrooms, and said, like, get these kids a battery of tests, and we're going to tell you where the late bloomers are. The ones that like they're going to thrive at the end of the year. They're going to just blow everyone away with how much progress they make. And so this is a test of potential. Some of it may be latent, some of it may be already displayed, but foolproof, Harvard, everything, researchers. So they asked the teachers though one thing: don't tell the students, don't change anything about how you teach them, please. We're trying to study this. And they give the teachers a list of students and then say, bye, have a good school year. And then lo and behold, the test works. The students identified as having latent, secret, ready to be unlocked potential ended up thriving at the end of the year. Isn't that amazing? Like, wow. let's get our hands on the assessments and call it a day. Except those kids were selected randomly, completely randomly. And so what that means is what we really got was a lesson in the power of expectations. Um, the the teachers must have changed their behaviors. There's a whole lot of research like written about this, like what happened, how did it happen? But one of the conclusions was expectations can shape reality, and that's where I get my call to action of just kind of like, what if we raise the bar for everybody on the team and said we expect more? What if everybody on your team really was expected to have high emotional intelligence and there were no excuses, no like, well, they're a rock star good with computers, and well, like, no. And it's not a hypothesis. I had a team like that. And at the New York Times, we actually ended up having a team of just all women, design, engineering, product, everybody. Just it was a small team on a smaller kind of project, but it was all women, and we realized like we've been conditioned to have high emotional intelligence, or like we've had high expectations of us our whole lives. Like, what did it work out like? Um, and I gotta say, like, uh, this often is invisible work, the soft skills, being good communicators, connectors, etc. Um, they were not only recognized on this team, they were encouraged, and the impact of that was pretty cool. The collaboration was not at the expense of productivity. We met our deadlines. We weren't burning out. We really worked on encouraging trust and autonomy. We made it safe to ask questions. Talking was not at the expense of doing. And we created just, guards against burnout. We increased team outings. We added learning time into our schedules. Like we created a really, um, what I would say is like a really great emotionally intelligent environment. And then inclusion by default. When we had our first male engineer join our team, we realized like we all knew exactly what it was like to be the only one on our team at some point in our careers, and we proactively included him. We made sure that we communicated and like we're inclusive by default on our teams. But we also saw some of the dark side too. We realized like, wow, we're in agreement so often. We were a homogenous group and we were definitely missing perspectives. So it was a very interesting experience to have there. But the outcome of this really is just like we knew, personally, I knew like raising the bar, raising the expectations for everyone on your team is not only possible, but it's going to lead to better outcomes. So instead of just talking about it like, why should we raise expectations? Science says so, it's possible, it'll work. Let's talk about how to actually level it up on your team. Um, these should be a few of the actionable things you can start doing in your own teams or for yourself. But I'm going to start with two different perspectives of things to stop doing and interrupt, and things to encourage more of. And so I'm just trying to give you kind of like a rock skipping across a pond surface. There is so much more to this, so much depth of information to this. Um, so I just encourage you to be curious and either reach out. I can send a plethora of resources, or to kind of do your own kind of search online, reading books, all this stuff. Like there's so much to this. So I'm going to run through some of the things that can help develop the emotional intelligence on your team and to raise the bar and expectations for that. So the first one, I will be on just a high horse about this forever. You've got to, especially if you are in a position of leadership on your team, you must interrupt toxic behaviors and create better outlets. I'd like to give you the disclaimer that if someone is coming in bad faith and is a bad actor, and somebody is like intentionally trying to harm, this is not the talk about that. That's not where you can kind of tweak a few things around your team. Like that's like, do not have bad actors on your team. That's a whole like hold them accountable, not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specifically like the dysfunctions that kind of emerge that if left unchecked can create honestly less than ideal environments. And as managers or as leaders, we talk about creating the environment for people to do their best work. Part of that means interrupting those toxic behaviors that aren't serving them, and creating better outlets for those. And so I kind of just stuck this all in one slide. There are a lot of dynamics that can emerge, and they're really fun to look through because the same kinds of behaviors that don't serve us in our regular lives and relationships, they don't just disappear. They can make their way into our work lives as well. So you can have somebody who kind of has this negativity that sucks people in and takes their energy, right? There's people who they believe they're being constructive, but what they're actually doing is costing a lot of energy on your team of others. Emotion is information, emotion is energy, and somebody who allows their emotion to spill out and negatively impact others, despite the positive intention, it's still a behavior that needs to be interrupted. And so, for something like if you find yourself on a team where there's a lot of complaining and there's a lot of just like, oh, this is so negative, all this stuff. The best thing you can do is create an outlet for agency. That means somebody does not have enough autonomy or control to change the outcome. And it's an important thing to work with them in partnership to create an actionable path forward. Um, Again, that's to be said. If somebody's not really wanting to fix things and they just want to complain, that's like a totally different thing. um, but when somebody starts to get negative, tends to be that they're actually what they're really searching for is the agency to make change, and they're finding themselves blocked from it. Rumination is another one that you might find on your team. Venting is cool, but rumination actually is something that reinforces the negative patterns to the point where you are unable to find the positive patterns again. This is one where having really more structured retrospectives and systems on your team to allow for productive, constructive, let's have action items at the end of this reviews of things, of projects, of quarters, at a regular cadence can help prevent this kind of repeating the negative patterns or repeating the negative thoughts or repeating the kind of like the cycling on what went wrong and shift the behavior to what went right. Again, this is something that costs a lot of energy and can shift the absolute kind of the ability of somebody on your team to contribute in their best way. And one of my favorite metaphors is the bucket of crabs metaphor. If you haven't seen this, this is where when one person tries to change something, the other person prevents them from doing it. The metaphor being, if you have a if you're a crab fisherman and you go and you want to go get some crabs, if you have a bucket and you put one crab into it, it'll just crawl out. But if you put two crabs into it, they'll never make it out because as soon as one crab is about to crawl out, the second crab will pinch it down, and in an infinite loop, they'll never make it out of the bucket. So, one of the things to watch out for is when somebody tries to make a change or do a proposal on your team or take an initiative, is there anybody acting like a crab and dragging them down and telling them why it can't be done, why it shouldn't be done, or stopping them with a no? And one of the most important things that I really like to remind folks, and it's easier said than done, is to find ways to say yes. Sounds a little bit improv, like yes and, uh, but it's important to be able to find paths forward. It's you can get in the habit of saying no a lot, and it takes a lot more energy and it takes a lot more work, which is worthwhile work, to find a path forward and find a clever path forward given the circumstances. There's always something clever that can be done, if we can think through it. And if not, well, then that's a different problem. That's where you need to focus your energy. But being kind of like identifying that dynamic is also, and interrupting it is also really important. And ultimately, what it comes down to is having a team where folks understand what it means to have boundaries. There are a lot of people who come in who either have never practiced having boundaries, never had to develop having boundaries, and they might have a very difficult time. And having a team structure in place where you understand what you allow, what you hold to account, or what you reward with attention, it matches up to the things you actually want to continue happening on your team. Um, so that if somebody makes a mistake, you don't punish that and incentivize hiding your mistakes. If somebody makes a mistake and fixes it, you incentivize the fixing of it by focusing on what they did right more than what they did wrong. And so the same thing with boundaries. If somebody is holding up a boundary. You don't kind of like keep pushing it further and further. So if somebody's off work and they're out of office, you let them hold that boundary and you make sure everybody else holds that boundary so that you show people like we respect each other's boundaries. And as a consequence, a lot of the things on the team, um, boundaries is like one of the magic things that kind of, I don't want to say magic, but boundaries are one of the more important things that we need to kind of remember will take care of a lot of the other problems that might come up. It's kind of hand wavy, but anyone who's ever had to put up hard boundaries might be nodding right now because it takes time. It's very difficult, and for some people, putting up boundaries feels like a very uncomfortable thing. So if you are a leader on a team or if you're a manager on the team, it's up to you to make sure that like you help facilitate good boundaries and you make sure that those good boundaries on your team are not broken. So that could mean yourself not messaging people on the weekends. Use the send later feature if you're going to work on a weekend because it works for you, whatever. But don't send something to your direct report on a weekend. Schedule it for later. Just keep the illusion alive if that's if that's it. But it's still a boundary. Because what I'm talking about really is like none of this is a magical ability. These are skills to be learned, discomforts to be overcome, and it's really learning about humans and how humans work together and all of the things we were never taught in school. You know, like group projects were always the worst part, and nobody ever seemed to get it right. And there was always just like, I guess I'll do everything by myself, kind of descent into chaos. But group projects are pretty much all we do as adults, and it totally can work. And there's a lot of research on the things that make it work better and the things that make it worse. And so there are a couple of those things that can interrupt things going well, or the things you should interrupt that prevent things from going well. But there's also stuff that you want to encourage. You want to have a sustainable, strength based approach to work. Trust me. Sustainable, like don't have people bring their own passion and then burn out. Like we have to find work that replenishes people, so they're not stuck doing the wrong thing and then they grow the wrong career doing the things they don't like. Strength based will always outpace kind of like nitpicking someone's weaknesses and telling them like, well, you missed this, now you need to work on this, now you're not so good at this. When people lead with their strengths, they tend to raise their skills across the board. um, and so if somebody, you know, as we raise our expectations, working with people's strengths to help them approach their areas like outside of their comfort zone and lead with their strengths, that uh, that's what's going to lead to success. Um, Find the work that makes people feel the flow. I know that term's been used a lot, but it's essentially Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's theory that like there's this place that exists, a state of being when you're fully engaged in your work. And one of my favorite things to point out is like, you know, what's outside of the flow is like panic and boredom, depending on which way you veer. So if the challenge is way outside your skill level, you're not going to feel flow. You're going to feel panic. And if the challenge is way below your skill level, then you're just going to be bored and leave. And so it's really important that as we work with people, they're given the work that replenishes them. They're not bored to death. They're not panicking. People who are in the flow tend to also be happier, more well adjusted people. Speaking of well adjusted, there's a lot we can do to burnout prevention. One of my favorite things is to mention things like Dr. Sonsniak's theory of learning. This is where we talk about the cycles of learning, where you can go from the play phase where you're like, I love this, I'm just exploring, I'm following my curiosity, to the discipline phase where it's like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to learn things line by line with a textbook so I know it well. To the synthesis phase where you can combine the curiosity of play with the discipline of hard study. That's kind of the equivalent of you know, listening to music, playing around, trying to find a few notes you like, to discipline where you just practice scales, practice, you know, playing the piano. And then synthesis is when you're able to come up with your own songs or with your own new experimental ways of doing things with the skill of somebody who's mastered the instrument. And the cool thing about this is um, Wasting your time is a critical part of learning. Being able to play is something we only say children do, is a critical part of replenishing your curiosity, your passion. And so, one of the things that I would love to encourage all leaders to do is to make sure that there are opportunities, especially as you're getting to the learning and development budget reset time, that there's opportunities not just for discipline and not just for, um, here's a tutorial, read this book, but also the opportunity for them to play and learn things through their curiosity, the things that got them into whatever discipline that they like. Give people the opportunity to be curious again. That takes time, that takes planning, and that takes a lot of work, but it is something to work towards. And then also make sure you're always asking good questions. I don't know where I've read this. I've been trying to find it ever since. But at one point, I heard that there was a study on influential people, and it was found that they ask twice as many questions as the rest of us. And I don't know why it stuck out so much, but I was like, okay, well, let's see that. How does that work? Um, I guess immediately ask them questions about it. So influential. Um, but being curious is at the heart of this. The ability to be curious is the ability to want to find out more, and it's something we should work towards. And curious people, people who ask more questions, are also going to be the ones who aren't going to be so set in their ways, who aren't going to bring down the bar of emotional intelligence. They're not going to be the bucket of crabs or the black hole of negativity. They're more likely to approach a problem with curiosity. But at the end of the day, the most important thing of all of this is, like, you got to give people time. Time scarce people who are panicking about their work are not going to give you the best emotional intelligence, the things you want on your team. Um, Time scarce people can't collaborate very well. They're not going to come in with creativity, and they're certainly not going to engage in the flow, no matter how much you expect of people. Again, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to create an environment where people are not only given the time to do their work, they're given the work that is going to replenish them, to keep them curious. And most importantly, the work you do isn't going to take your full life, because at the end of the day, I want to bring it back to community. Like I said, I joined Women Who Code in 2014, and having a community outside of my day job was really important. Having the time, having the space to essentially clock out and then go and see this community and work with them. Shout out to Holly Gibson for running a great Women Who Code Austin. Um, it was huge. To be an active participant was important. And we need to make sure that we keep this promise with people, as everyone's working from home and productivity is rising. And uh, it seems like the workday is just stretching further and further into people's lives and into their homes. Like, we have to remember, a company is not a family. Work friends should not be the only friends someone has, and your work coworkers should not be your support network, your only support network. There's a big difference between, like, yes, I can rely on my coworkers, and outside of my job, I don't have anyone. I've given my whole life to this. And especially with the pandemic, with folks really being isolated from their usual channels of support or their usual channels of kind of camaraderie, and disconnected from their regular communities. I can tell you a whole lot of my communities aren't, they don't exist anymore. Either folks have moved away, or they've first moved remote and then they stopped hosting them. It feels like we have to start from scratch, and people need to be able to not just be part of like emotionally intelligent team, all this like great well-oiled machine of a team. They need the space and the time and the emotional energy to be part of their greater community. Um, you know, Social connections are worth so much. Um, and especially now, given the news that we're seeing all the time, like, we need the creative, talented people working on our teams to also be there and present for their communities, so that I can go to a PTA meeting every single time I need to and be present for my daughter and the children at her school. I want the people on my team to be present and full members of their communities, so that when they come to work, they're not out of balance, that, but they're part of a great network of like people just showing up for each other in the same way that I said earlier. Because the old formula again of relying on passion, um, it's just not going to work in the new world. We should feel like this, like, yeah, cool, fast-paced startup seeks passionate coder, like, whatever, I got this, like, because they're not going to extinguish it. They're going to grow this. They're not going to burn through me in a year or two. I'm going to be able to thrive there and be there for my community and be there for my family. And that's what it should be. And you'll find that when we stop, kind of, or we shift, not like we stop, we shift the culture away from give everything, uh, work all the time, this is your identity, and we shift the culture to the healthier, like, yes, you love this stuff, you know, we have great boundaries, we're able to give you time and space, we have ways and outlets for you to do your best work. You're going to find that the emotional intelligence on your team is going to rise pretty much overnight if they are not stretched thin. So again, interrupting the things that aren't serving people and stretching them thin, and then creating better environments for them to learn, to grow, to engage in the flow. Those are really important things, and especially if you're a leader, that's something we need to prioritize, especially now. Um, Passion is not a renewable resource. Right now, it's getting burned through, and instead, it should be grown. Um, Passion should just grow, and it can. And I encourage everybody who is either listening today or is watching a recording just to think about how full is your cup today? Like, how much energy do you have? What is the balance between like what you're getting, what you're replenishing, how curious you're feeling, and how much you feel like you're spending? And are you in a sustainable pace? How long can you do this? Do you feel like you're growing? Are you thriving? And I hope the answer is yes, and many more years of creative, amazing work in tech. Thank you so much. I'm on the internet quite a lot. Again, I feel like I just skipped over these bare topics, but I would just encourage you, if any of this sparked any curiosity, there are books and authors and studies and research all about ways to either look at theories of learning, how people grow their talents, how people like what is the flow, what is a growth mindset, how's that measured, all of those things that we hear kind of casually mentioned in tech. And let's start this conversation and make it better, because like, I don't know, everyone has a reason why they're doing it. I just, it has to be good, because otherwise what's the point? Like, it can be amazing, and I still believe that every day. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Thanks. And thank you everyone in the chat as well, like really giving great feedback and questions. We have a few minutes I'd love to highlight some people's comments and some questions if that works for you, Natalia. I think the
Yes.
first thing is everyone wants to know who did the illustrations. And I
Me.
think I was going to say, I'm pretty sure it's Natalia.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Um,
Yes, a lot of wonderful comments. Your slides were amazing.
Thanks. I would love to I'm gonna sit here and catch up on all the comments.
Yeah.
I would love to say I can keep up with a talk and comments and slide notes, but that would have been a disaster. So if you have anything you want to have a conversation or connect, as is the theme of the event, reach out. I'm on Twitter too much, probably. And yeah, just do the work, because if not us, then who? It's that important, and it can just be good. I say that all the time. It can just be good. We're creative people. We can, like in design, I say like we can craft our own user experience too. Let's not forget about us. And it can be better every day.
Yeah. There was two themes that I noticed a lot in the comments that I'd love to know your feedback on, because you spoke so much about boundaries and that really sparked a lot. And one, I think Tiffany shared that Tiffany's seeing more responsibility putting on the receiver of the information rather than the sender. Like,
Mhm.
because we are all distributed, I know you work at a distributed company too, I believe. So people are in a lot of time zones, so people work whenever they want. So how do you negotiate, like, is it your responsibility to put up those boundaries? How do you have that conversation? Like, don't send me that, even though that's when you're working. I think that's really come up a lot in the comments.
I don't micromanage how people work. I personally have a weird time, like after my daughter's bedtime, I brew a cup of tea and I'm like, this is my
Mhm.
APAC time zone hour. And it's just like, yeah, I'm working at 10 p.m., but no, this works for me. And so I don't micromanage that. I actually just have the mental model like you own your time, and I'm grateful for your creativity and time that you choose to spend working at my team or my company, us working together. And it it's a wild shift to make, but people are working, especially in tech, they're working where they want to, and they're choosing to share their creativity with me, and I do not take that for granted. So when
Mhm.
I say boundaries, I mean sometimes it's the reverse. I have to help people stop working and remember, like remind them. I'm like right now, my big thing is like hashtag work from outside. Like it's a nice for in the northern hemisphere. When I'm on my AM call with West Coast, East Coast folks, I'm like, it's nice outside. Go take a call from outside if we can figure out the Wi-Fi, like anywhere. Keep the boundaries,
Mhm.
don't go in either direction, because no good lies down that path. The path paved with good intentions. You know exactly where that leads.
Great. And then as we start to wrap up, another very common theme I saw Lynn and Nikki mention this among many other people is how to, this isn't the best phrasing, but how to manage up, how to bring this up with your manager or, diagonally, if there's someone of a different team, if you feel like, what, these are things that our team can work on, but you're not the manager of the team. If that does that make sense? I can rephrase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, this is kind of a hard one because if they don't like what you're saying, like companies are the way they are by design because they like it that way. And it took me way too long to learn that lesson. If they're not buying what you're selling, that might not be a great place for you to be. You'll just kind of frustrate yourself trying to change a culture that does not want to be changed. One of the best things about like community too is like find your people. I guarantee you for every place that's stodgy and like I don't we work at this time and this time we want our butts in the seats. Somebody's like that's what I want, and they're all there and they're all working together, and they don't want to change. Whereas it's like if you want to have a different environment, a different culture, um, start working with the people who are like wanting to shape it that way. You can't convince somebody like you can't nobody can convince you to change the way you want to like the core of you like how you want to work. So a little bit of that is just like find people who want to work in a similar way. There's all kinds of different people in the world. um, that's kind of terrible advice, but like you can't make it's the same way you can't make somebody like you can't you can't sometimes you can't change something from the level you're in. I would never advise someone to take that on individually. You kind of have to work with what you've got.
Thank you. So that was our last question. Is there anything that, as we close this talk and get ready for our panel, what do you want people to leave your talk with today?
The greatest advice I ever received is still block your calendar off for the things you need to do and be relentless about it because you will never look back and say, I'm really glad I skipped, you know, some important life event to
Mm.
do a project you won't remember. Find a way to make it sustainable and good for yourself, or you are doing it at personal expense. And that rarely pays back. That'll
Great.
just make you one of the people in like a bucket of crabs or something, or a black hole of negativity. Like you can become one too. Watch out.
Great. Thank you. So thank you so much, Natalia. Thank you, everybody in the comments sharing your experiences. We're going to take a